language of the inscription is Sumerian. Sumerian is the oldest written language. It's not related to any of the Indo-European or Semitic languages in that part of the world.
Before I die, please listen. These chilling words came from Samuel Noah Kramer, the world's top Sumerian expert. What did he find that was so unsettling? He discovered the Sumerians weren't just building cities, they were engineering belief. They merged writing, ritual, and massive architecture into one seamless system of control, a way to program an entire population. You'll hear what Kramer really meant and how it changes everything we know about civilization. We're about to uncover the 5-stage revelation he kept hidden for decades. First, haunting. What most people don't realize is that the vast majority of Sumerian tablets aren't exciting myths. They are, to put it lightly, boring. They are thousands and thousands of administrative records, tax receipts, lists of grain deliveries, warehouse inventories, 3 goats for the temple, 10 measures of barley for the workers. It's the world's first and most boring spreadsheet. Kramer, as a top-tier translator, had to read them all. And that's when he found the glitch. He began noticing something that refused to fit. Certain phrases kept appearing where they had no reason to be. So, here's the deal. He'd be translating a mind-numbing warehouse record for a shipment of beer, and suddenly a line from a sacred hymn to a god would be stuck in the middle of it. A phrase from a creation myth would turn up in a worker's ration list. It was like finding a line of poetry in a grocery receipt. At first, Kramer did what any good scholar would do. He dismissed it. He figured it was a coincidence, a habit of the scribes, maybe a copy-paste error, ancient style. But as the repetitions grew, so did his unease. These weren't random slips of the stylus. And get this, the same patterns, numbers, symbols, and formulaic sentences appeared across entirely different genres of text. He started calling them the sentences that wouldn't let go. They crossed the boundaries between sacred and practical writing, between myth and mathematics. To most scholars, this overlap meant nothing. It was just a shared vocabulary. But to Kramer, it was a clue. It was the first hint of a design hidden inside the world's first writing system. He began tracing these rogue phrases across archives from different cities, Uruk, Nippur, and found the same patterns repeating. One phrase in particular haunted him: to raise the pure mountain and bind heaven and earth. This line was all over the temple hymns describing offerings to the gods. But the exact same line was also found in construction logs for the ziggurat of Ur. Think about that. Why would a builder's record, a simple log of bricks and labor, repeat the language of a sacred chant? Why would the act of laying bricks be described in such cosmic religious terms? The more Kramer looked, the more connections he found. Lines that opened prayers also opened accounting tablets. Blessing formulas meant for the gods matched the legal phrases used to seal trade agreements. Numbers considered divine, 3, 7, 60, appeared not only in myths, but in supply tallies and ration schedules. This is where the story gets dark. Kramer was forced to accept a chilling new idea. This wasn't an accident. It was a system. Some have gone further, suggesting this wasn't just a system of control, but a system of magic. A wild theory maybe, but think about it. What if these repeating phrases were a kind of linguistic spell or mantra? What if the scribes were embedding this code into every corner of daily life, not just to remind people of the gods, but to literally use the power of words to shape reality? In this view, every tax receipt wasn't just a record, it was a renewal of the spell that held the kingdom together. The Sumerians weren't just using writing to record their world, they were using it to align their world. The same words that invoke the gods also defined labor, trade, and governance. By embedding sacred language in the ordinary, the Sumerians blurred the line between worship and administration. Every tablet, whether it listed sacrifices or taxes, reinforced the same worldview. That divine order and human order were one and the same. To Kramer, this meant writing was not a neutral tool for memory. It was a structure for thought. He suspected this was no accident of culture, but a conscious system. A civilization teaching itself how to think through repetition and rhythm. By the time Kramer wrote his later works, he could no longer ignore the evidence. These sentences, the ones that refused to let go, formed the backbone of an entire ideology encoded in clay. They made the act of administration itself a sacred duty, transforming writing into both a practical tool and a spiritual exercise. Little did Kramer know, those stray phrases would soon point him beyond words to a message written not on tablets, but into the stones of the ziggurat itself. Kramer had found the code, but he soon realized the Sumerians had built a massive three-dimensional version, a building that was also a message. The 3D warning. When Samuel Noah Kramer turned his attention from the tiny handheld tablets to the towering ruins of the ziggurat at Ur, he had his holy moly moment. He suspected that the Sumerians had not merely written their worldview, they had built it. Rising from the flat, pancake-flat Mesopotamian plain like a man-made mountain, the great ziggurat of Ur stood as both temple and symbol. Its massive terraces climbed toward the heavens, culminating in a shrine dedicated to the moon god Nana. Every brick, every step, and every alignment with the stars seemed to carry the same message Kramer had been uncovering in clay: the fusion of heaven, earth, and authority. What fascinated Kramer was how the written and the built mirrored each other. In the temple archives, he found those endless lists of materials: baskets of clay, measurements of bricks, and offerings of grain. At first glance, ordinary administrative records, but their phrasing, as we saw, was uncanny. Lines from hymns appeared in construction logs. The same ritual verbs, to purify, to ascend, to bind heaven, were used to describe both religious ceremonies and the hauling of building materials. To Kramer, this could not be a coincidence. The language used to build the temple was itself sacred. Every act of construction was written as a continuation of creation. He began calling the ziggurat a three-dimensional text, a monument that could be read as well as climbed. So here's the deal. Each terrace, he noted, represented a level of the cosmos described in Sumerian myths. The lowest terrace symbolized the earthly plane, the middle levels, the atmosphere and stis, and the highest, the divine realm. Worshippers ascending the stairways were not merely walking upward, they were moving through layers of theology. The ziggurat was the physical expression of the same patterns he found in the tablets. But wild theories take this a step further. Kramer saw a text, others see a machine. Think about it. Why this shape? Why the precise, massive stepped pyramid? Some researchers have pointed out that ziggurats, much like the pyramids in Egypt or Central America, are built in very specific, non-random locations. They are often aligned with shocking precision to constellations, solstices, and equinoxes. Was the ziggurat of Ur just a text, or was it a functioning piece of technology? Some theories suggest these structures were designed to harness sound. Imagine thousands of people chanting at the base. The precise angles of the walls and stairways could have focused that sonic energy, that vibration, into a beam, shooting it straight up to the shrine at the top. The shrine, often plated in blue glazed bricks to imitate the sky, would become a resonator. A hotspot. For what? To bind heaven and earth? Was that a literal instruction? And let's go wilder. The god of the Ur ziggurat was Nana, the moon god. Nana was said to travel the sky in a celestial boat, or Mager boat. This is usually dismissed as poetry, but what if it wasn't? What if the ziggurat, with its massive flat top, was a landing platform? A refueling station designed to receive the sky boat of a god who was not a metaphor, but a physical person. The construction logs Kramer read, with their mix of sacred hymns and material lists, suddenly looked different. They looked less like a construction report and more like a technical manual, where the hymn, the purpose, is just as important as the bricks, the components. Kramer's core insight remains, but it gets weirder. The ziggurat wasn't just a symbol of hierarchy, it was the engine of that hierarchy. It was a giant piece of psychological and maybe physical technology. Its architecture was a masterclass in control. For 99% of the population, their journey stopped at the ground. They could look, but they couldn't climb. Their duty was to bring their grain, their beer, their goats, their taxes to the warehouses at the base. For the priests and the elites, they could ascend to the first level. They were higher than the common folk, but that final staircase, the one to the very top, only the high priest and the king could go there, to the shrine, the control room, the landing pad. The building was both a symbol and a script, where architecture, religion, and politics spoke the same language. The ziggurat and the tablets did not simply coexist, they completed each other. One made belief visible, the other made it repeatable. Together, they created a cycle in which every festival, offering, and law reaffirmed the cosmic hierarchy etched into the city's skyline. This was the key to Kramer's growing theory. The Sumerians didn't separate sacred and secular life because they couldn't. The very language they wrote and the buildings they erected made sure of it. The system was perfect. The tablets were the software, the ziggurat was the hardware. But Kramer's deepest fear was about the programmers themselves. Programming the programmers. As Samuel Noah Kramer followed the trail of repeating phrases from temple walls to ziggurat terraces, one truth became impossible to ignore. Behind every sacred hymn, every royal decree, and every ledger of brick stood the scribes. While kings built monuments and priests led rituals, the scribes were the quiet engineers of continuity. Without them, there would be no civilization to remember. But Kramer's translations of the school texts, the Adaba or tablet house, revealed something far more sinister than a simple classroom. We tend to think of scribes as humble secretaries. Yeah, about that. In Sumer, the scribes were the most powerful and most hidden force in the entire civilization. First, you have to understand cuneiform. It's not an alphabet. It's a hideously complex system of over 600 wedge-shaped signs. A single sign could be a whole word, a sound, or a silent marker that told you what kind of word was coming next. To master it wasn't a weekend hobby. It took 12 years. In the great tablet houses, young scribes, almost exclusively the sons of the elite, trained from sunup to sundown, and the training, as Kramer translated, was brutal. The texts are full of students being caned for bad handwriting, caned for talking, caned for being late, caned for not knowing their obscure grammar. A wild theory looks at this and doesn't see discipline. It sees trauma-based mind control. Think about it. You take the children of the elite, you isolate them for over a decade. You subject them to a brutally difficult task, and you enforce it with physical pain and public humiliation. This is a perfect recipe for creating a secret society. You are breaking them and remaking them, binding them together in a shared experience of pain, secrecy, and elite knowledge. You are ensuring that they will never break the rules or, more importantly, reveal the secrets. And what secrets? This is the core of Kramer's warning, the curriculum. A student scribe would be given a clay tablet. On one side, he'd have to copy a mathematical problem, how to calculate the area of a field, or how to figure out the number of bricks needed for a new temple wall. Then he'd flip the tablet over, and on the exact same piece of clay, he would be forced to copy a religious hymn, a myth about the gods, a proverb about divine order. They did this every day for 12 years. Kramer realized what this was doing. It was fusing the two concepts in their minds. It was programming the programmers. After 12 years of this, a scribe didn't need to be told to put a religious phrase in a tax record. He did it instinctively. To the Sumerian scribe, there was no difference between a balanced budget and divine order. A correctly calculated tax receipt was a form of prayer. A perfectly measured field was a reflection of the God's perfect will. Math was theology. Administration was ritual. The flexibility of cuneiform gave them enormous power. A sign for star could also mean God. The symbol for life could double as account. Kramer realized they could encode theology inside economics, embed myth into trade records, or lace divine order through administrative texts, all without changing a single mark. They didn't just record power, they wrote it into existence. Their control of language made them indispensable. Every law, hymn, and transaction passed through their hands. To the public, they were servants. In practice, they were the system's nervous system, deciding which words endured. Kramer was struck by how their training bound them to secrecy and hierarchy. Knowledge of writing was limited, guarded, and inherited. Literacy was power, and power was piety. Even when kings fell and cities burned, the scribal phrases persisted. The same openings, closings, and ritual numbers. To Kramer, this revealed that it wasn't the rulers who shaped the civilization's identity, but the scribes who maintained the code. They were the custodians of cosmic order. This is the first true secret society, the first Illuminati. A cabal of men who understood that true power isn't the sword. True power is the stylus. True power is the ability to write reality, to set the terms of the debate, to own the operating system of the entire culture. Kramer found the phrases, the building, and the programmers. But what exactly was the code they were protecting? The truth is wilder than he ever dared to publish. The God in the numbers. By the final decade of his life, Samuel Noah Kramer had read more Sumerian tablets than any living scholar. He was the man who literally wrote the book History Begins at Sumer, cataloging 39 firsts for human civilization. The first schools, the first laws, the first proverbs, the first taxes, and even the first Noah flood story. He meticulously translated the myths of gods like Enki and Enlil. He decoded their system of kingship. He unraveled their impossibly advanced base 60 mathematics. But he felt a gnawing sense of incompletion. He saw the pattern. He saw the Sumerian code, a system of total top-down control that seemed to emerge from nowhere, fully formed like an operating system being installed on a blank hard drive. He saw the sentences that wouldn't let go, the rigid linguistic formulas that defined everything. He saw the system of control, but he never publicly asked the next terrifying question: who built the system and why? Kramer gave us the safe version, the academic version. He told us the Sumerians, a brilliant, innovative human society, invented this complex system to create social order out of the chaos of early city-states. But other researchers, looking at the exact same tablets Kramer translated, came to a very different and very wild conclusion. This is the theory that Kramer's warning was really about. The theory he was too afraid or too mainstream to ever touch. The Anunnaki. So here's the deal. A controversial rogue scholar named Zecharia Sitchin came along and reread Kramer's translations. Sitchin was a linguist, fluent in ancient Hebrew and Sumerian cuneiform, and he claimed that Kramer and all the other mainstream academics had made a huge fundamental mistake. They had translated the word Anunnaki as gods. Sitchin argued this was wrong, a convenient, safe mistranslation. He said the tablets, when read literally, don't describe gods in a spiritual sense. They describe physical beings, beings who ate, drank, fought, bled, and traveled. Beings from another planet. According to this wild theory, the Sumerian myths that Kramer translated are not myths at all. They are history, a literal, sober account of events. In this version, the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, were a race of beings from a planet in our own solar system called Nibiru, a planet with a massive 3,600-year elliptical orbit that brings it near Earth only on rare occasions. They came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago for one reason: gold. Not for jewelry, not for wealth, but for a specific high-tech purpose. Their home planet Nibiru was dying. Its atmosphere was failing. They needed to create a fine monoatomic gold dust to spray into their upper atmosphere, a shield to reflect the sun and save their world. The problem? Mining gold is hard work. The Anunnaki who were sent here, the working class, known as the Igi, eventually rebelled. They were tired of toiling in the mines of what is now South Africa. They mutinied against their commanders. A full-blown labor crisis erupted. So their chief scientist, a being named, you guessed it, Enki, the same god from Kramer's myths, had an idea. A wow factor solution. He proposed using their advanced genetic technology to create a primitive worker. A Lulu. A slave. They would take an existing hominid on Earth, early man, and jumpstart its evolution. They would upgrade its DNA by mixing it with their own. They would create humanity. The Sumerian creation myth that Kramer found, the one where man is created to be a slave to the gods, was, according to Sitchin, a literal description of our own creation. We were genetically engineered to be a slave race, to do the hard work the gods refused to do. This one wild theory suddenly makes Kramer's entire discovery even more chilling. Every piece of the Sumerian code he found snaps into place, but in a much more sinister way. Let's look at the evidence again through this new lens. The sentences that wouldn't let go. Kramer was haunted by these rigid phrases. In the Anunnaki theory, these aren't just control phrases. They are the linguistic commands of the slave masters embedded in every corner of the new human-run society to ensure obedience. They are the firmware for the biological robots they just created. The scribes Kramer saw them as a scholarly class. The wild theory says they weren't just a secret society, they were the middle management, the human Anunnaki hybrids. The first creations, the demigods like Gilgamesh, who were 2/3 god, 1/3 man. They were chosen by the masters to manage the human slave population, the buffer between the gods and the grunts. The ziggurat Kramer called it a temple. Sitchin said to read the tablets literally. The ziggurat wasn't just a temple or a man-made mountain for worship. It was the corporate headquarters, the gold refinery, the palace of the Anunnaki overlords where they lived physically on their mountain far above the human workers. It was the stairway to heaven, a literal launch pad for the sky ships that transported the refined gold. The Mies, Kramer translated these as the blueprints for civilization. Dozens of tablets that outlined everything from kingship and priesthood to weaving and beer making. The safe version says the Sumerians invented these concepts. The wild theory asks, how does a society go from mud huts to complex metallurgy and astronomy overnight? It doesn't. The Mies weren't blueprints, they were the work orders. They were the software package. The gods literally gave humanity the entire operating system for a slave society pre-packaged. Kingship was the creation of a human boss to manage the other slaves. Weaving and beer making were the tasks assigned to the workers to support the mining operation. It was a data dump of civilization. The base 60 system. And what about Kramer's divine numbers? The base 60 system that gave us 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. Why 60? It's their math, the Anunnaki's math. Sitchin's followers argue this is the most wow factor clue of all. The entire system is based on the SAR, the 3,600-year orbit of their home planet, Nibiru. Our concept of time itself is an alien artifact, an imprint left by our creators. The Great Flood. Kramer found the first flood story featuring a hero named Zusudra, the model for the Bible's Noah. Mainstream scholars call this a regional flood myth. Sitchin's theory says this was a political event. The tablets describe a bitter conflict between the two Anunnaki leaders. Enlil, the harsh commander who saw the human slaves as nothing but tools, and Enki, the scientist who had created them and felt a certain responsibility. According to the tablets, Enlil became enraged that humanity was breeding too quickly and making too much noise. He saw a coming natural disaster, the melting of the Antarctic ice cap at the end of the last ice age, and saw his chance. He bound the other gods in an oath. Let the flood happen. Let the slave race be wiped out. But Enki couldn't let his creation be destroyed. He secretly went to Zusudra and gave him the plans for a submersible vessel, a boat to survive the deluge. The flood wasn't a myth. It was a failed attempt at genocide by one Anunnaki faction and a secret rescue mission by another. The pattern in the clay, the Sumerian code that Kramer found, was the slave control system. It was the operating system the Anunnaki installed in us to make us want to be slaves, to make us believe that our hard work was a sacred duty and that our masters were gods. Kramer saw a human invention for human control. The wild theories say he only saw the shadow of the real truth. He saw the prison, but he couldn't see the real jailers. And the most chilling part? The tablets say the Anunnaki left. Their mining operation was complete. Nibiru's atmosphere was saved. They left Earth, leaving their hybrid middle management, the elite bloodlines, in charge. They left the system running. Kramer's final words, "Before I die, please listen, take on a new terrifying meaning." What was he really trying to warn us about? Was he warning us that the masters are still out there? Or worse, that they don't need to be here? That the Sumerian code they installed is still running, and we are still their obedient, willing slaves, digging for gold in our modern ziggurats, never once thinking to look up and question who built the system. The modern ziggurat. In the final years of his life, Samuel Noah Kramer spoke less in lectures and more in fragments, half-thoughts that lingered between revelation and warning. His students remembered him as methodical and modest, so when he began ending letters and interviews with the phrase, "Before I die, please listen," it caught attention. It was the plea of a man burdened by something left unsaid. After decades of decoding the words of the world's first civilization, he believed he had found the truth, that the Sumerians were the first to understand that language could build worlds. Their words weren't just descriptive, they were performative. When a scribe wrote that a king was chosen by the gods, that very act of inscription made it true within the Sumerian worldview. Writing was an act of creation, and those who controlled it shaped reality itself. Kramer's safe warning was that this system of control, this fusion of power, architecture, and language, was the true inheritance of Sumer. It's the blueprint for all civilization. The ziggurat embodied divine hierarchy in stone, while cuneiform preserved it in text. Together, they formed a feedback loop that taught generations to accept order as natural. The priest read the tablet, the worker hauled the brick, and both believed they were fulfilling the will of the gods. Kramer feared this insight would be misunderstood. He wrote, "The Sumerians discovered that to rule the mind, one needs only rule the symbols." To him, this was their most profound invention. But the wild theory says Kramer's warning was deeper. What if he knew about the Anunnaki theory? What if he saw the implications of Sitchin's work and it terrified him? What if his warning was his way of almost telling the truth without being erased by the academic mainstream? Think about it. If the Anunnaki code is real, did it ever stop? This is the ultimate chilling thought. The Anunnaki created a slave race, gave them civilization, the Mies, as a system of work, and installed a control system, the code, to make us obey. Then, what happened? Did they just leave, or did the code they installed just keep running? The wild theory is that the masters never left, or they left their system in charge. The human elites they trained, the first scribes, the first kings, just kept the program running. That warning, listen before they erase this, it isn't about some dusty ancient history, it's about right now. You think the ziggurats are gone? They're not. We just call them skyscrapers. They're the same massive, imposing structures designed for one purpose, to make you feel small and to make the institutions, the banks, the governments, the religions, feel permanent and all-powerful. The scribes are still here too. Today they're called lawyers, coders, politicians, and media moguls. They are the tiny elite class that still speaks a secret language, the cuneiform of today. It's legalese, computer code, financial jargon, and media spin. And make no mistake, they are the ones writing our reality, the ones programming our thoughts. And the code? The code is definitely still here. It's just called the economy. It's called the two-party system. It's called consumer culture. It's the invisible operating system running in the background, telling you that you must work for 40 years at a job you hate just to earn their gold. It's all designed to make you support a system you don't control, run by gods, the elites you will never ever see. Kramer's final writings read more like reflections than scholarship. He warned that the separation between sacred and secular, between myth and record, was an illusion. The first writers, he noted, did not record truth, they manufactured it. This is the final, brutal truth. Samuel Noah Kramer's warning is that the Sumerians taught humanity that whoever writes history also defines truth. Their clay tablets didn't just record a civilization, they created one. The Sumerians were programmed by clay tablets. We are programmed by digital screens. Are we truly any different, or did we just get a software update? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if this made you question reality, like and subscribe.